Hello everyone. Welcome back to our channel, Canada Immigration. IRCC just updated Canada's immigration backlog and it's still over 1 million. Canada's latest IRCC application inventories update, released January 20, 2026, reflecting files as of November 30, 2025, shows the overall backlog is essentially flat at just over 1.0 million cases. The pressure has shifted deeper into permanent residents, especially express entry and express entry aligned PNP streams. IRCC is now managing 2,130,700 total applications across citizenship, permanent residents, and temporary residents. Of these, 1,005,800 are beyond service standards, the backlog, which works out to about 47.2% of the total inventory. Compared with the previously reported snapshot, October 31, 2025, the backlog barely moved, but category-level movement is meaningful. Snapshot comparison, October 31 versus November 30, 2025. A closer look at the month-on-month data reveals subtle yet meaningful shifts in processing performance between the end of October and the close of November 2025. While overall volumes edged downward, the composition of the workload tells a more nuanced story about operational pressure and efficiency. To begin with, total inventory declined from 2,182,200 cases on October 31 to 2,130,700 cases by November 30, marking a reduction of 51,500 cases. This contraction signals steady progress in drawing down the overall caseload, suggesting that throughput continues to outpace new inflows, even if modestly. Turning to the backlog, the numbers remained largely stable. The backlog decreased marginally from 1,006,800 cases in October to 1,005,800 in November, a net improvement of 1,000 cases. While this change may appear incremental, it reflects consistency rather than deterioration, an important indicator during periods of sustained processing demand. However, a more notable movement appears in cases within service standards. These declined from 1,175,500 at the end of October to 1,124,900 by November 30, a drop of 50,600 cases. This shift suggests that a portion of the inventory aged into backlog status over the month, highlighting ongoing strain on service timelines despite reductions in total volume. This dynamic is clearly reflected in the backlog percentage, which rose from 46.1% in October to 47.2% in November, an increase of 1.1 percentage points. In practical terms, nearly half of all pending cases are now outside standard processing times, underscoring the delicate balance between volume reduction and timeliness. IRCC flags these datasets as approximate, with privacy-driven rounding and suppression in certain tables. Category by category, where the backlog is moving. What stands out in November is a classic offset pattern: temporary residence improves, but permanent residence worsens. Permanent residence is now the main pressure point. As of November 30, 2025, IRCC had 941,600 permanent residence applications in inventory. Of these, 515,000 were backlogged and 426,600 were within service standards. Relative to October 31 backlog data, PR inventory rose, 928,800 941,600, and the PR backlog increased sharply, 501,300 515,000. The latest month-on-month snapshot highlights a clear contraction in overall case volumes between the end of October and November 2025, accompanied by a subtle shift in how that workload is distributed across service standards. Starting with total inventory, the caseload declined from 999,100 cases on October 31 to 942,000 by November 30, reflecting a notable reduction of 57,100 cases in a single month. This downward movement points to sustained processing momentum and effective clearance of pending files. The backlog also showed tangible improvement. Backlog cases fell from 450,700 in October to 434,400 in November, a decrease of 16,300 cases. This reduction is more pronounced than in previous periods and signals focused efforts to address older, overdue applications. At the same time, cases within service standards decreased from 548,500 to 507,600, representing a decline of 40,900 cases. While this drop partly reflects overall inventory shrinkage, it also indicates that some files aged into backlog status as processing timelines tightened. This internal shift is captured in the backlog percentage, which rose from 45.1% in October to 46.1% in November, an increase of 1%. In effect, although the absolute backlog fell, it now represents a slightly larger share of the remaining inventory. This aligns with the program-level backlog trend on January 20, 2026. Express entry backlog climbed from 27% in October 2025 to 32% in November 2025. Express entry, aligned PNP backlog rose from 51% in October 2025 to 53% in November 2025. Family sponsorship, spouses/partners/children outside Quebec, held at 20% in October and November 2025. The net message, IRCC's PR workload is growing even as the overall system inventory falls, and the backlog share is rising most visibly in high-volume economic pathways. Or it could be because IRCC already has enough permanent residency applications processed to meet the annual targets set by the Immigration Levels Plan 2026. Temporary residence is improving, but visitor visas remain heavily backlogged. IRCC reported 942,000 temporary residence applications in inventory as of November 30, down from 999,100 at the end of October. The comparison between October 31 and November 30, 2025, paints a clear picture of steady volume reduction paired with lingering pressure on processing timelines. While the system continues to shrink in size, the balance between timely cases and backlog remains a critical point of attention. To begin with, total inventory declined sharply over the month. Case volumes fell from 999,100 at the end of October to 942,000 by the close of November, a reduction of 57,100 cases. This sizable drop reflects consistent output and an ongoing effort to reduce the overall caseload. Encouragingly, the backlog also moved in the right direction. Backlogged cases decreased from 450,700 in October to 434,400 in November, marking an improvement of 16,300 cases. This suggests that processing teams made measurable progress in tackling overdue files rather than simply absorbing new ones. However, cases within service standards saw a steeper decline. These fell from 548,500 to 507,600, a reduction of 40,900 cases. While part of this decrease aligns with the overall drop in inventory, it also indicates that a portion of cases crossed beyond standard timelines during the month. This shift is reflected in the backlog percentage, which increased from 45.1% to 46.1%, a rise of 1.0 percentage point. In practical terms, nearly half of all remaining cases are now outside established service standards, despite the absolute backlog shrinking. Within temporary residence, 434,400 were backlogged and 507,600 were within standards. Study permit backlog improved materially, falling from 41% in October 2025 to 36% in November 2025. Work permit backlog eased slightly from 50% in October 2025 to 49% in November 2025. Visitor visa backlog stayed stuck at 57%, third month in a row, per the summary of the same IRCC dataset. This is a key insight. Study permits are the clearest month-over-month improvement in November as Canada tightens intake of international students, while visitor visas remain the most persistently clogged temporary stream, possibly due to the FIFA 2026 World Cup now. Citizenship is rising again. As of November 30, IRCC had 247,100 citizenship grant applications in inventory, with 56,400 backlogged and 190,700 within standards. This month-on-month comparison reveals a modest contraction in overall workload, alongside a noticeable uptick in backlog pressure, signaling that while volumes are easing, timeliness remains under strain. At the headline level, total inventory edged down from 254,300 cases at the end of October to 247,100 by November 30, a reduction of 7,200 cases. Although smaller in scale than previous declines, this drop confirms continued progress in managing incoming and pending applications. In contrast, the backlog moved in the opposite direction. Backlogged cases increased from 54,800 in October to 56,400 in November, an addition of 1,600 cases. This rise indicates that a greater number of files exceeded standard processing times during the month, despite the overall inventory shrinking. Cases within service standards declined from 199,500 to 190,700, a decrease of 8,800 cases. This shift suggests that some cases transitioned out of the service standard category and into backlog status, reinforcing the trend seen in the backlog figures. These movements are clearly reflected in the backlog percentage, which climbed from 21.5% to 22.8%, an increase of 1.3 percentage points. In relative terms, nearly 1/4 of all pending cases are now backlogged, marking a tangible rise in processing pressure. That represents a higher backlog share, about 23%, than earlier in 2025, and an increase from October's backlog level in your referenced Inc. news report, 54,856,400. IRCC's own backlog trend shows the citizenship grant backlog at 22% in October 2025 and 23% in November 2025. The hidden driver: fewer new students and workers are entering the system. IRCC's latest data also shows a steep drop in new arrivals due to the capping of new international students and foreign workers, which helps explain why parts of temporary residence are cooling even while PR pressure grows. Key points from the IRCC. Total new student plus worker arrivals between January and November 2025 were 52% lower than the same period in 2024, down 334,845. New student arrivals were 60% lower over the same period. New worker arrivals were 47% lower over the same period. Even with the arrival drop, the in-Canada stock remains large. People holding only a study permit, 476,330 in Canada as of November 30, 2025. People holding only a work permit, 1,491,500 in Canada as of November 30, 2025. This is the structural shift IRCC is telegraphing: reduce fresh temporary inflows while leaning harder on in-Canada transitions to permanent residence, an approach that is also one of the contributing factors to the increase in PR workload even when temporary intake slows. Asylum claims are trending down, easing one source of system pressure. IRCC's asylum trends show declines in multiple channels. People submitted an asylum claim between January 1 and November 30, 2025 compared to the same period in 2024. Claims tied to TRV holders: IRCC reports a 55% drop in November 2025 compared with the same time last year. Crossings between ports of entry: IRCC cites a reduction from an average of per day, March 2023, to now 13 people per day. The monthly table also shows the national total declining from 9,145 in October 2025 to 7,805 in November 2025, a drop of 1,340 in 1 month. While asylum processing sits in a different operational lane than express entry or study permits, lower claim volumes reduce immediate strain on certain intake, eligibility, and downstream processing resources, especially when combined with tighter TRV scrutiny and border policy changes cited by IRCC. What the comparison with the previous data tells you. Based on IRCC's December 16 release, reflecting October 31, 2025 data, framed the moment of a backlog surge, with the system back over 1 million backlogged files. The latest program-level snapshot reveals a mixed performance landscape across immigration streams in November 2025. While some categories experienced welcome relief, others saw a sharp rise in backlog pressure, highlighting uneven progress across the system. Starting with express entry, backlog rates climbed significantly from 27% in October to 32% in November, a 5 percentage point increase. This is the most pronounced rise among all programs, signaling growing strain in one of the system's flagship economic pathways and raising concerns about processing speed for skilled applicants. The provincial nominee program, Express Entry Aligned, also recorded an uptick. Backlog rates increased from 51% to 53%, a 2-point rise, reinforcing the pattern of mounting pressure within economic immigration streams that rely on coordinated federal, provincial processing. By contrast, family sponsorship applications for spouses, partners, and dependent children outside Quebec remained stable. The backlog rate held steady at 20%, indicating consistent processing performance and relative protection of family reunification priorities. Encouraging improvements emerged in temporary resident categories. Study permits saw a notable reduction in backlog rates, falling from 41% in October to 36% in November, a 5-point decrease. This suggests focused efforts to clear student applications, likely aligned with academic intake cycles. Similarly, work permits, excluding extensions, posted a slight improvement. Backlog rates dipped from 50% to 49%, a 1-point reduction, pointing to incremental gains in handling labor mobility demands. Meanwhile, temporary resident visas showed no movement, with backlog rates unchanged at 57%. This plateau indicates that visitor visa processing remains under sustained pressure, with no immediate relief evident month over month. The newest update confirms that the backlog level is still effectively over 1,005,800. But the story is now composition, not just size. Temporary residence backlog is shrinking month over month. Permanent residence backlog is rising and is now the most important constraint, especially in express entry and PNP-aligned streams where backlog percentages are climbing. Citizenship backlog continues its slow upward drift, 22%, 23%. In other words, the system is not clearing the backlog so much as reallocating where the backlog sits. What does this mean for immigration applicants right now? If you are an express entry or an express entry aligned PNP stream, expect more variability in processing times and more sensitivity to IRCC's internal prioritization, because backlog shares are rising, 32% and 53% respectively as of November 2025. If you are filing or renewing a study permit, the backlog trend improved in November, 41%, 36%, which is typically a leading indicator before the processing times stabilize. If you are applying for a visitor visa, the backlog is still unusually elevated at 57%, and it has not improved for months in the published snapshot. If you are tracking Canada's immigration slowdown, the data supports a nuanced view. New student and worker arrivals are down sharply, but PR inventories are still climbing, consistent with a strategy that shifts selection toward people already in Canada. The most important takeaway from IRCC's latest open data updates is that Canada's immigration backlog is no longer a single headline number, it is a moving pressure map. November's data shows temporary residence is starting to cool, asylum claim volumes are trending down, and yet permanent residence is absorbing the strain, with express entry and PNP-aligned streams showing the clearest warning signals. If current patterns hold into early 2026, the public conversation will likely shift from "Is the backlog over 1 million?" to "Which programs are carrying the backlog and who is waiting longer because of it?" That is all for today, in this video. Please hit like and subscribe for an upcoming video. See you later, in the next video. Till then, take care.